Come back for more punishment, huh? Welcome back, dear and adored listeners. It is I, the Doctor, whose name causes the bots to shadow ban half of my internet appearances. Yeah, me. I'm that guy. Halloween is here again. Are you excited? I was, until I went to the store and saw the price of shaving equipment due to the whole inflation thing. Sadly, for Halloween this year, I might have to give out apples without the razors in them. How can I scare off trick-or-treaters without razors? And have you seen the price of rat poison? Anyway, you don't need the old doctor to tell you how expensive it's become to keep up the old tradition. There was a time when change felt more like a good thing than bad. A time when people looked forward to what was coming down the pike next, instead of fearing and loathing it. And our old friend from the desert, PQ Ribber, has walked into town to read an email we got about a Dogman encounter that took place in the change-filled year of 1967. That was the year of the Summer of Love. It started with the Beatles releasing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in May, and drew to a close as the Pink Floyd released their first album, written almost entirely by Syd Barrett. Why that year involved so much use of recreational mind-altering goodies that I'm not even sure if YouTube will allow us to refer to that time period at all. Well, if this next one gets censored, don't blame me. I'm just a kindly deceased old doctor. Instead, blame PQ Ribber, as he reads us the historical Dogman tale we're calling The Psychedelic Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm the one who sent you those 2 stories about Dogman and the various people who have worked at my family's real estate firm over the past century that we've been in business. This time, I've got a story about my Uncle Henry, who is no relation to your animated character at the end of your shows. He told me I could use his real first name. Or up to him, I would be able to tell this story all the facts intact. But as I've explained, this would also mean outing our family business and everyone associated with it. And we're not prepared as a business entity to do that right now. As you'll hear in the story, some of the Dogman interactions that my family has had sound like something out of a comic book or science fiction movie. Plenty of people would think that we're all insane, even though I happen to believe my Uncle Henry about those weird old stories he sometimes tells on Christmas or Thanksgiving or on Halloween. In 1967, Uncle Henry was supposed to become a freshman at an Ivy League university, but he opted to take a year or more off in order to go find himself. This involved hanging in a hammock between 2 trees toward the back of the yard and going to sleep listening to psychedelic pop music for a month or longer. When doing nothing eventually started getting boring, Henry started to drive down to Detroit and go listen to bands. Sometimes he'd go to bigger shows at larger venues and see touring acts. Other times he'd be at local venues checking out the MC5, people of that nature. Like, I don't even think the Stooges were on that scene yet. Uncle Henry was there very early on. Driving back home in the middle of the night from seeing a band down south in Detroit, Uncle Henry's car sputtered to a halt along the side of a very dark and lonely highway in the middle of nowhere on Old Michigan Route 76. I love it when old is part of a road's name. It makes me feel like I made a wrong turn and shouldn't actually be where I am. In the case of that night with my uncle, I'd say that was the correct assessment. He should have taken a better lit and better used route, one too busy for the Michigan Dogman to hang out around. Now, you need to remember this was not 2022. Not only did my uncle have no Wi-Fi, the term hadn't been coined yet. The reason for that is because Wi-Fi hadn't been invented, nor had the cell phone for that matter, or the home computer, or even the VCR, if you're old enough to remember what VCRs were. Back then, when your second or third hand hunk of junk hippie car pulled off the road and died in the night, you were pretty screwed. On this particular road, they don't even have lights now in the 21st century, so you know they didn't have them in 1967 either. All they had was trees, the stars overhead, and a skinny two-lane blacktop with a yellowish line painted down the middle, at least occasionally. At that time of night, there wasn't going to be much traffic, and you could wait till dawn before somebody might come along to help you out. Henry told me that he fussed with the car and the engine for a good 10 or 20 minutes, trying to understand what was wrong. Eventually, he noticed that he was out of gas, and he said that was the first time he began to wonder if he had become unfocused in life. Henry had a can to carry gas in for emergencies like this, which his father had forced him to buy and stick in the trunk. He got it out of the back, locked the car up, and started walking forward, hoping he'd come upon a gas station to help him out. He didn't remember if there were one ahead, but he knew he hadn't passed one in a long while, so no reason to walk the other way. At first, he felt kind of scared out there alone like that. The stars seemed like they were pressing down on him, and the crickets chirped so loudly that he felt they were screaming at him. His heart was pounding so forcefully in his ears that he was certain everyone could tell how scared he was. He had been told as a small boy to whistle or to sing when he felt scared. It was hard to feel scared when you sang a happy tune, he remembered his kindly teacher saying. Uncle Henry told me that he began singing some kind of Sound of Music song, or maybe something by Peter, Paul, and Mary, or the Weavers. At first he was scared to sing it out, and his voice sounded wavy and tentative. While nothing seemed to change around him as a result of this, he bravely sang a little louder and slightly a bit more proudly. Soon he was full on into some corny song about an ant lifting a plant or whatever, when he heard a creature howling off to his left and deeper in the woods. It sounded like a comment on Henry's singing voice, or maybe I should say a protest against his singing. It might not have been that. Maybe the mysterious canine was enjoying the music and trying to harmonize. We may never know. What we do know is that in this instance, singing to make himself feel brave backfired on my uncle. He was now a lot more scared than before, and he was even thinking about turning back, cowering inside the car, instead of continuing his walk to a probably mythical gas station that he sort of hoped would be ahead eventually. I remember asking my uncle why he didn't just head back to the car as soon as he heard that howl, and his attitude was, if I went back to that car like a little chicken because I heard a doggy in the forest, and then the next morning found out that there was a gas station just around the next curve, I was going to be pretty unhappy about it. So I asked him if there was, in fact, a gas station around that next curve the next morning, and he said that was beside the point. Then he grumbled that I wouldn't understand how the world worked if I couldn't Google it on my talking camera phone, which is true. I absolutely wouldn't, and I completely don't care either. If I ever enter a time portal and get zapped back to the British invasion era, I'll deal with the problem then. Until then, I can Google it on my smartphone. So, Mr. Big and Brave kept walking through the dangerous night of the Howling Wolf, determined to buy gas from a station that didn't even exist, instead of just going and taking a hippie nap back in the car until help arrived. At that point, Henry was walking as quietly as he could, no longer wishing to draw attention to himself out there in the woods. It was too late, though. He had already alerted the Michigan Dogman as to where he was, if you think about it. There aren't going to be very many young human adults wandering around alone in the woods after midnight in a place that isn't set off as a natural or camping area. About the only reason anyone would have for being there was the one reason that Uncle Henry had. And that doesn't really happen too often, at least not on that one road. So if you were a large predator in that area and you heard the call of the young adult human male where you never or almost never heard one before, you might prioritize that as something that should be investigated now rather than later. In my opinion, assuming the Dogman is or was a natural species or predator in northern Michigan and southern Canada, he might have wanted to view the human as much or more out of concern as out of potentially turning that human into prey. Humans can alter landscapes suddenly, and their unexpected presence must not be very welcome by whoever or whatever is top of the local food chain. So, from the perspective of the Dogman, my uncle might have turned out to be someone lost, as he was, or he might have turned out to be part of an advance force of humans about to cut those woods down to put up a shopping mall and displace that Dogman's breakfast, lunch, and dinner, basically. So, the Dogman did poke out there and check my uncle out for himself. Henry told me he didn't hear the Dogman ever again after that initial howl, but at one point he looked up ahead of him and down the path about 80 to 100 feet in front, and he saw a big, dog-headed man standing perfectly still, like a wax model of a werewolf. It was bipedal and upright, with posture like that of a soldier. Its eyes reflected eye shine so brightly you'd have thought I was shining a flashlight at it. Although it must have stood 6'4", 6'6", it had the proportions of a much shorter man. Like, look up a picture of Rocky Graziano and imagine him over 6 foot tall with a wolf head, and you're there. Granted, when Uncle Henry told me Rocky Graziano, I thought that was an old, out-of-date reference and asked him for someone more modern. Henry insisted, and continues to insist, that Dogman had similar proportions to the late welterweight and middleweight boxer Graziano. Not to be confused with Rocky Marciano, of course, who was an entirely different boxer. Graziano was 5'7", so imagine his proportions sized up. And according to my Uncle Henry, you'd have the makings of a Michigan Dogman. So at first, my uncle just turned around, turning his back on the wolf-headed manimal, and slowly walked back toward his car. He would glance over his shoulder occasionally to see where the Dogman was, and although it was following him, it was doing so at a leisurely pace and keeping the same distance between the two. Then, one time, Uncle Henry turned around and saw the Dogman far closer than he had been prior. Not having heard his approach, my uncle lost his composure and burst into an open run back to the car. He told me he could feel the Dogman touching him now and then, reaching out from behind to grab at him, but somehow he kept getting away from his grasp. It seemed as though the Dogman was only playing with him. Maybe he just wanted to see how fast Henry could run just for the sake of his own Dogman knowledge base. Maybe it was just him following his predator instinct to chase whatever runs away. Fortunately for my uncle, The creature seemed to be more curious than angry or hungry, although it was an aggressive kind of a curiosity. Once my uncle approached his vehicle, the Dogman backed away and gave him some space. Henry locked all the doors and watched the Dogman out there on the road, studying him and his old wreck of a ride. It took the animal quite a while to work up the nerve, but eventually it dropped to all fours and nervously moved forward, ready to jump away at any moment should the car leap at it or bite. It seemed to regard it as another large animal, at least according to how Uncle Henry told me the story. After circling the car twice or 3 times, sniffing it all around, below and above, the beast seemed to arrive at his own kind of understanding of what the old car was, comprehending that it was something more like a cave or den on wheels than a living creature. The Dogman then sat on the road, outside of Uncle Henry's driver's side window, staring in at him. He just sat there, staring in at my uncle for hours. The Dogman watched my uncle sleep as he woke up, and the thing was still there, unmoving and staring. Henry said that Dogman acted like he was more interesting than anything else in the world. The story ends with law enforcement driving down the road and discovering the strange scene. They put their alarm on, which scared the Dogman away. It ran off on all fours like an ordinary wolf, but its size was big enough that the officers commented on it to Henry as they gave him a lift to the closest gas station and back. They wanted to hear all about the wolf and how it acted toward him, trapped in the car, but once he started telling them that it chased, or at least followed him, down the road while standing up on its hind legs, the officers suddenly wanted to change the subject. They had been friendly to him up to that point, but they seemed to sort of treat him more like a hippie weirdo after he admitted to them that it was not an ordinary wolf. Henry told me that he pressed the subject a bit anyway on the drive back to the car with the 2 officers. He mentioned to them how the animal seemed to have dog paws when it was down on all fours, and yet, when it stood up straight and tall like a man, those paws somehow appeared much closer to what we would call hands, except they weren't normal human hands. They were evil-looking, with long, curved, sharp, and nasty-looking claws extending from the ends of each. They looked more like cat claws than dog claws, but cat claws on steroids, too long and thick to be believed. They ended in more of a knife shape than a fishhook, though, and they didn't look retractable to Henry. Remember, he got to watch this walk upright, and then he got to watch this thing walk on all fours. Whenever he could see the paws or the hands or feet, those claws were always extended, never pulled in. Neither did he ever see them stick out further, in my opinion and that of my uncle. We think they were not able to be retracted in the way a cat can do it. So my uncle started meeting and attracting people who had either seen or heard about the Dogman and the Wisconsin werewolf. Some of the stories they told to try to explain the beast were your typical European werewolf kind of story, but some of them felt the creature sprang out of Native American culture in one way or another. Sometimes people said they were wise men from lost local tribes, shape-shifting into half-animal forms. Others said they were natural animals who were able to hide from humans due to their superior intelligence. There was one friend of Uncle Henry that I'll call the professor. I don't remember his name anyway. His opinion was that dogmen were a mutant kind of wolf, a kind that resulted sometimes when different breeds of canine interbreed for the first time. I find his theory particularly interesting now in the 21st century, so I'd like to highlight it a little bit. Now, I don't remember all the fancy words used in this explanation, but basically, the first time there's interbreeding between two species, you're much, much more likely to produce offspring that are larger than their parents. This is why I am of the opinion that dogmen or giant wolf-dog hybrids might result when wolves interbreed with certain kinds of house pet dogs. Since we have had epidemics of roaming dog packs destroying everything in their wake multiple times in places here in the United States over the last 20 or 30 years, we may also have been experiencing unprecedented levels of wolf and house pet mating as well. The offspring that survive those matings may, at least some of them, explain the Dogman sightings, or many of them. If this theory carries water and holds weight, and I don't yet know if it does, then it would mean that Dogman is not a separate and distinct species at all. It might mean that there would only be a few dogmen each generation, and that eventually they would become fewer and fewer as these species interbreed more and more in some cases, or cease breeding together in others. It might also help explain why science does not have proof of the existence of the dogman as a species. Maybe it isn't a species at all. Maybe dogmen are oversized dog-wolf hybrids. Even if you did succeed in capturing one of these behemoths, its DNA would probably only show it to be a wolf crossed with another kind of canine. It's not a perfect theory to explain everything. It doesn't explain the far older dogman and werewolf accounts from Canada down to Louisiana, but it might possibly explain some of the more modern sightings, or at least why there seem to be so many more sightings now than there ever were before. Anyway, that's me applying my newfangled thoughts over this old-time story. I've got 2 more installments in my Dogman Family History series here for Halloween. Next time, I'll be back with another Dogman story from the same Uncle Henry. This one took place some years later when the Dogman was encountered on the way back from Detroit Rock City, where he had just seen a show by the kids in someone's service. I forget who. Yes, Dogman after a Kiss show. Next week, same dog time, same dog channel. And now, here's a very important announcement about today's executive producer. Take it, Biggie.
Well, our channel got a bailout, and you know from who, just guess. I bet half of you have no doubt that our savior was CS. We'd like to thank all of you for increasing our views and revenue lately. It's been very encouraging. But that money won't come in for over a month, and right now, I'm eating and working because of a grant from the CS Foundation. She's actually just one person, but she's a huge angel investor to us. Accent on the angel. You know that story they tell about the family caught in a terrible tornado who say they were saved by flying angels? Well, that's CS to us, because our ad revenue got hit hard in the aftermath of the lockdowns. Making less money when inflation is worse than Jimmy Carter times? That's seriously bad news. And the only reason I've even had food money is because of a few very special people, names you hear pretty often around here. CS has been saving us by donating to us directly via our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page, which sends us the money in a second, not 2 months later. You know, some people have asked me to give you guys additional ways to donate besides PayPal and YouTube, but nobody suggested which one they would like me to add. Which is the best alternative? I'll add whatever you guys think makes sense to add. Also, whoever's been buying our merch, we'd love to thank you, but they don't tell us who you are as far as I can tell. Someone's been buying our Dogman drinkware and some other things I noticed. I wish they would tell me right away, and also let me know who's buying what, so I can thank you guys personally. I'm not sure if I'm even making sense anymore, so let me hand the baton off to our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Thank you. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.